Okay.
Hi, 6th graders. This is Mrs. Dedion, and I'll be doing your lesson today. We started talking about a set of numbers in class today, and there are actually all kinds of sets of numbers. You first start learning about numbers when you're in preschool. Those are called the natural or the counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you add in 0, and those become the whole numbers. And then today we talked about positive and negative numbers, and when you have the positive and negative numbers, you now have a set of numbers called integers. And so that's the group of numbers that we're going to be talking about in this lesson. So you were given a foldable in class. It looks kind of like this, and we folded it. And you can see that there are two number lines on the outside of the foldable. So if I were going to put some numbers on my number line, the number I would most likely stick right in the middle of the positive and negative numbers would be 0. 0 is neither a positive or negative number, and so it goes right in the middle, and you can go ahead and write this in with me on your foldable. And it doesn't have to be exactly in the center. You just kind of guess where it is. And so to the right of 0, I have the positive numbers. So I would start at 0 and I would go up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And if this line could keep on going, it would just never stop. If I go to the left of 0, I have all the negative numbers. So the next negative number would be -1, then -2, -3, and -4. All right, and again, these numbers would continue in the opposite direction forever also. Okay? If I flip this over and do the same thing on the other side, again, I'm going to kind of just guess in the middle where 0 might be. And again, to the right of 0 are always going to be your positive numbers. And to the left of 0, you're going to have your negative numbers. And if I go too fast for you, if you're trying to catch up with the writing part of this video, you can always pause your video at home and catch up and then start it again. Alright, so if I go ahead and open this up, I can see in the very middle section, at the very top, it says definition. And this is a definition of integers. So I'm just going to write integers at the top so I know what I'm defining. And the integers is the set of all the positive numbers and their opposites. So another way to think about negative numbers is to think about, negative can also mean the opposite of a number. So for example, if you have 2, -2 would be the opposite of a positive 2. Alright, so here you have a little graphic that kind of tells you what we were just talking about. The natural numbers, these are also called your counting numbers because it's what you learn to count with. And start with 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if you add in the 0, that's the only difference between whole and natural. And then if you add in the negative, you have this group of numbers called the integers. Alright, so if we turn this now, this direction, we're going to be answering these questions based on the number line we just drew. Alright, so our starting point in the very middle was what? Where did we start in the middle of our foldable? It was always 0. Kind of it's the number that divides that number line in half. And the further we go to the right on our number line, sorry about that, the larger or the greater the value of the number. Right? So the more you go to the right, you look back at your number line. If I'm going to the right this direction, I can see that this number over here on the right, 6, is going to be bigger than all the numbers on this side. So it is called the greater quantity. Those numbers on the right are the greater quantity. If we go to the left, then the numbers are getting smaller. So these are called the lesser quantity. And if we look back at our number line, you can see that starting from 0, even though as a positive number, 4 is bigger than 1, with negative numbers, the opposite is true. Okay? -4, because it's further to the left, is going to be a smaller number, smaller value than a -1. Right, so smaller numbers to the left, greater numbers to the right. All right, and if you turn your foldable up and back up to that second sort of flap there, positive numbers are always going to be what then? We can say that positive numbers are always greater than the negative numbers, greater or more, right? And so here you have the symbol for greater than. Positive is greater than negative. What about 0 though? Is 0 a positive or a negative number? Well, it's actually neither one. 0 is neither negative, okay, nor positive. It's the only number like that. So it's kind of special. And then the negative numbers, when you compare them to positive numbers, are always going to be smaller or less than the positive numbers. Okay, notice this is the symbol for less. Negatives are always less than positive. Alright, so we just want to define a couple more words for you. We've been using the word opposite. You kind of already know opposite. If I talk about the integer -4, its opposite would be, okay, what's the other number that is on the other side of the number line from -4? Well, +4, right? We all pretty much know that. If I try the opposite of 0, what number is opposite 0? Well, really just 0. It doesn't really have an opposite, or its own opposite. And the opposite of a +7 would be -7. These numbers, -4 and +4, are also something we call 0 pairs. Because 0 pairs, if you put them together, their sum is 0. So you can kind of think of it like that. If I have $7, like a +7, and then I spend $7, like -7, then I'm left with $0. Okay? Or if the temperature is -4 outside, and the temperature increases by 4 degrees, now you're back at 0. So if you look at your number line, if you start at -4 and then you go up 4, where do you end up? At 0. So 0 pairs kind of cancel each other out. They make each other 0. So the last word we need to talk about is absolute value. We talked a little bit about this in class. Absolute value, its definition is this. So go ahead and write it down. Absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. Alright, and it has a symbol, just 2 straight lines. This is the symbol for absolute value. So when they put these 2 lines around a number, like we could do the absolute value of -4, those 2 lines are saying absolute value. All that's really asking you is, how far is -4 from 0? Well, if you look at your number line, starting at -4, if you count how many spaces it takes to get to 0, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And because absolute value is always a distance, you can't live -4 miles from someplace. Absolute value is always going to be positive, so you might want to put that down somewhere. Always positive. So it really doesn't matter what number is inside the absolute value, the answer is always positive. It's not the same for opposite. Okay, opposites, the sign changes. Okay, and if I asked you, okay, so what's the absolute value of 0? So you have these 2 lines around the 0 that's telling me to find the absolute value, which again is the distance from 0. Well, how far is 0 from 0? 0. Okay, and then if I take the absolute value, if I put an absolute value of 7, so I put my 2 lines, that's the symbol for absolute value around a +7. Really what I'm asking is, how far is 7 from 0? Well, it's just 7. Okay? It's different than its opposite. Remember, opposites, the signs change, but with absolute value, always positive. Alright, so that's the foldable. We're just going to practice a few problems, and that'll help you with the homework you were assigned to take home. Alright, so I'm going to move to the board. Let's say I have, let's say 5 numbers. -3, 2, -4, -11, and 5. And I want to put these in order, let's say least to greatest. Alright, well I can consider how this would look on a number line. Alright, so if I think about my number line, I know 0 is here. Okay, so I know my negative numbers on this side, I know my positive numbers on this side. Well, how many negative numbers do I have? I have a -3, okay, I have a -4, and I have a -11. Well, which one comes first? Okay, well if we remember from our foldable, so as we get closer to 0, this number appears to be getting smaller, even though its value is getting bigger. Alright, so the further a number is from 0, the more negative it is, if you want to think of it that way. Alright, so -11 would be here, and then what would come after that? -10, -9, -8, and so forth. Alright, so if this is -11, and I can put a dot there to represent -11, then -4 would be somewhere in here, -4. So -3, okay, assuming less negative as it gets to 0, so -3 would be to the right of -4. So we have -4 here, -3 here. And then my positive numbers, it kind of switches, right? So these numbers appear to be getting smaller even though they're less negative as they get closer to 0. So my positive numbers now, you know how to do these. 1, 2, 2 would come next. 3, 4, 5. 5 would be somewhere over here, right? Alright, so let's try another group of numbers. Let's say I have -12, -16, -8, 10, and 4. Alright, I'm going to put those in order, least to greatest. Well, I know the least amount, okay, or my numbers that are to the left are the smallest numbers. So I want to figure out what numbers are to the left. Okay, well, I picked the biggest negative, basically. So -16 would come first. Okay, and then the number that, as I get closer to 0, the numbers get less negative. So the next number would be -12. Okay, and then my next negative number is -8. Okay, and then these would keep going until I get to 0, and then they change signs. Okay, and so now I'm looking, I've done the negative numbers. Now I'm looking at my positive numbers. Alright, so starting at 0, the numbers, now they get bigger. Well, they still get bigger the whole time. And so then 4 would come next, and then 10 would come next. Alright? And then you can throw in decimals to this also. So like, let's say I want to say, alright, now where is 2.5? Alright, well 2.5 is somewhere between 0 and 4, so I can put it in here, like 2.5. It's not quite 2, and it's not quite 3, it's in between those two. And be careful you read the directions, because if I said, alright, write these numbers greatest to least, okay, now I've changed the problem. Now I want you to start with the biggest numbers. Oops, sorry about that. Biggest numbers and go backwards. Oops, I'm sorry. Greatest to least, yes. Alright, so let's say my set of numbers is -2, -4, 8, 6, -12. Okay, I can still think of it using a number line, but the bigger numbers are over here. So which number is the farthest to the right? Which one, if I think about where 0 is, which one's the farthest just this direction? Well, it has to be a positive number. So I'm going to look at these two numbers to start with. 8 and 6. Which one's farthest to the right? Well, that would be 8, and then 6. Okay, so if I'm writing greatest to least, if my answer is down here, then 8 is going to come first, then 6. And then now I've gone to 0, all right, so which negative number, if I'm going this direction, okay, would come next? Well, -1, -2 would be next, so -2 is next. Okay, and then out of -4 and -12, -4 is going to be next. And then -12. Okay, and I forgot this earlier, but we like to box your answers, so you can do that. Alright, the other kind of problem you might see in your homework tonight is that symbol of the absolute value. Right, so remember that if you see something around a box, or those lines around a number, like -12, absolute value is what? Always positive. So how far is -12 from zero? Just +12. Okay? Or if you have the absolute value of 5, absolute value of 5 is always 5. Okay, but don't confuse that with opposites. All right, so let's say you need to find the opposite of 2. Okay, well the opposite of 2 is what? -2. So opposites always change signs, whereas absolute values are always positive. And another thing they sometimes throw in is this, like that. They might write a problem where they have a negative and then another negative. Okay, well remember negative kind of stands for opposite, so this is kind of asking you, what's the opposite of -3? Well, the opposite of -3 is +3. Alright? And then the last kind of problem you could possibly see is when they ask you for the opposite of the opposite let's say 4. Okay, so you kind of have to read this problem backwards. The opposite of 4 is -4. Okay? But the opposite of -4 is what? +4. So the opposite of the opposite is +4. Okay? And if we switch that, okay, and now I say, all right, what's the opposite of -2? Okay, then I start with this part. What's the opposite of -2? +2. But then what's the opposite of that? The opposite of 2 is -2. All right, so hopefully that explains what you need to do for homework tonight. If you have any questions, remember you can come into school early, and Ms. Clipman and Ms. Smiley and I are all here by 8 o'clock, or you can see us in advisory if you're not able to get here early. So good luck, and thanks for listening.